Okay, when I was a kid, like many, we used to trudge out into the forest, find the loveliest tree we could, butcher it, mount it in our home for 2 weeks, and then chuck it out on the sidewalk. Pleasant though it was, the whole situation sort of made me feel a bit crappy. I'm thinking about how we might get around this, because the numbers are actually sort of staggering. Each year in the States alone, 35 million Christmas trees are cut down and 500,000 plastic trees bought. Now, I'm not exactly a bleeding heart tree hugger, but seems like if you can avoid some unnecessary damage to the environment, you might as well do it. As the booming plastic tree business makes clear, when it comes to Christmas trees, be they pine or spruce or whatever, there is a formula for the perfect tree. A precise combination of symmetry, taper, angle, foliage, etc. So I'm thinking that a company could produce a reusable trunk that would accommodate the perfect series of selectively pruned spruce or pine branches to be inserted into it. Before proceeding any further, I should mention that I'm not under the illusion that a tree of the sort I go on to describe here could be produced profitably at the average price fetched for a real Christmas tree today. Christmas trees are a dime a dozen. The thought is that many of those who feel sort of shit about butchering a tree for their own short-lived amusement at Christmas each year, and who have sweet, sweet disposable income, might be willing to pay a premium to be relieved of their guilt. Their sense of guilt, anyway. I mean, it is, let's be fair, tokenism, but cumulatively, tokenism becomes, well, a lot of tokenism. There aren't that many branches on a spruce or pine Christmas tree. I googled pictures of dead Christmas trees, that is, trees where you can see the whole skeletal structure of a tree, and for the average spruce or pine Christmas tree of the average height, there are around 15 to 25 branches emanating from the trunk, plus the number you'll see at the very top of the tree. I'll deal with that issue in due course. In any case, most of the foliage one sees on a spruce or pine Christmas tree is an offshoot of these few main branches. Accordingly, under this proposed system, the number of pre-cut branches that a farmer would need to prune and the number of branches that the consumer would need to insert into the trunk each year would be relatively few. Okay, so that presents the concept, generally, and the plausibility. So if you want to bail now, by all means. However, in what follows, I'll go into detail about how I think the whole contraption would work. So if you look at the drawing in the top right corner, you see a cross-section of the trunk component of this new sort of Christmas tree I'm proposing. As shown, a slot has been cut into the backside of the tree, that is, the side that will ultimately be facing the wall in whatever home it's going into. This slot, which runs the length of the tree from top to bottom, is meant to serve as a water reservoir. Basically, the slot makes the trunk hollow, and once sealed off with a plate of some sort running along the back surface of the trunk, creates a reservoir from which branches can access water once inserted into holes running from the top to the bottom of the trunk. After these necessary modifications, the spruce or pine tree trunk is kiln dried to proper humidity and then sealed. Thus, post-surgery, the trunk will appear exactly as it did before. That is to say, like the natural spruce or pine tree trunk that it is. But having been properly dried and sealed, it will be able to last in perpetuity. Oh, and tree huggers out there will be pleased to hear that the trunks used could be gleaned from the dead trees tossed out by assholes on the sidewalk each year, post-Yuletide. Naturally, you could make this trunk out of extruded plastic, and maybe even make it a bit realistic by sticking tree bark to the surface. But, no offense to anybody out there, but I've always thought the plastic trees sort of seemed cheap. Though I do know they're quite expensive. Alright, so I'll turn to the branches now. Based upon the model for the perfect tree, the company would sell a set of perfectly shapen branches to complement its standardized trunk design each year. It might even deliver these to one's home, wrapped in a beautiful bow. Each branch in this kit would have a label on it to identify which standardized hole in the trunk it is intended to go into. And once the whole set is inserted, one has the perfect tree. And at that point, with all of the holes sealed off, water can be added to the reservoir to ensure that the tree stays not just perfectly shapen, but perfectly green. Now, one might ask how water poured into the reservoir would stay in the reservoir. Pressure exerted downward by gravity might be expected to cause water to seep out through the holes surrounding branches stuck into the insertion points on the trunk. This issue might be addressed as follows. In the top picture, you see a tree trunk with labeled holes. Each of these holes is drilled at a specific diameter to accommodate a corresponding branch with the proper girth to fit in tightly. The holes are also bored at the appropriate upward angle so that once inserted, branches remain erect at the proper angle for the tree species. For their part, each of the branches selected for the tree will have their stump ends stuck into something resembling an apple core to pare them down so that they fit perfectly into the hole bored into the trunk. And if you look at the stump of the branch I've drawn in the upper picture, you'll see what I'm talking about. For the top of the tree, there are a number of issues to contend with. First, lower branches will constantly be sucking water out of the reservoir, and so tree branches at the top will soon find themselves unable to reach water inside of the reservoir. Second, the top of the tree is quite thin and prone to breaking, so some sort of reinforcement seems necessary. I think possibly to tackle these two issues, one could reinforce the thin upper trunk with a narrow, perforated aluminum pipe running through the center of the uppermost portion of the tree trunk. The skin of the upper trunk would be wrapped around this underlying aluminum frame, much as a taxidermist wraps the hide of an animal over top of an underlying mold. Rather than a reservoir, the perforated aluminum pipe could contain a sponge of some sort to provide for the minimal water needed by the small upper branches. A wick could connect to this sponge and run down to the bottom of the reservoir in the lower trunk. Anyway, the precise design of the upper trunk is something I'm continuing to consider, and on that note, any suggestions would be most welcome. So, according to this idea, Christmas tree farmers do not need to cut down millions of trees each year, but can instead make a reusable trunk and then selectively prune branches to insert into this trunk to create the perfect tree. In other words, Christmas tree farmers would no longer be chopping down millions of trees each year, 35 million trees in the US alone, but would instead be selectively harvesting branches from their trees so that their trees could at once adorn our homes and yet go on living. Okay, that's that. With respect to maintaining water throughout the whole of the reservoir at all times, and to the general manner of watering the tree, it seems to me that a gravity-fed system could do the trick. Assuming a proper seal between the stumps of the tree branches and the holes they are inserted into, and thus assuming that the seals are able to endure some small amount of water pressure from within the reservoir, the tree might be watered in much the same way as a nurse administers a saline solution into one's arm. As long as a watering basin, or bag, or whatever, is positioned at an altitude above the height of the tree, and this watering basin could be located at some distance removed from the tree, even in an entirely different room, a small hose attached to the bottom of the basin could be used to siphon water into the water reservoir. The water level in the tree reservoir would thus be topped up at all times.